administer the oath to the resource persons, both physically and virtually.
Kindly, please stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in this Senate hearing?
Sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Please take your
Please
seats.
take your
Yeah, let me find out from those present, who among you will make opening statements? Mr. Yes, Secretary Lorenzana, and then Secretary Año, and then Secretary Esperon. Yes, you may have the floor. And after that, we will open the floor for interpellation. And I will recognize my colleagues in order of their time of login. Namely, of course, the Senate President, then Senator Grace Poe, Senator Bongo, Senator Rizon Tiveros, and Senator De La Rosa. Yes, Secretary Lorenzana, kindly proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to all the senators attending. Good morning to my colleagues, Secretary Esperon, Secretary Año, and all those staff who are here, General Parlade. Good morning to all. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for calling this meeting, this hearing. We welcome this. And my colleagues here will be presenting some presentations and to actually debunk the accusations of the Kabayan Bloc that we are attacking them. We will present evidences from the LCAC, the Vice Chairman of the LCAC, Secretary Esperon, and also from the ILG, their appreciation of what's happening in the ground. I think this is very timely, Mr. Chairman, so that we can expose once and for all the true color of these people that are trying to destroy our democracy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Secretary Ed Año.
Senate President Vicente Soto III, Senator Pampilo Lacson, sir, other members of the Senate, fellow public servants, good morning. The government has been accused of some sectors for red tagging people who have opposing views or are critics of the administration. First, we'd like to point out that this whole issue of red tagging is not a product of our imagination or fancy, merely to pin down the opposition as the leftist groups would want it to appear. In fact, it was Communist Party of the Philippines, Yorme season, who red tagged these left-leaning organizations such as Anakbayan, Bayan Muna, Gabriela, Kilusang Mayuno, and all the front organizations. This is a free and democratic country, and free speech is constitutionally protected. However, driven by their Marxist-Leninist ideology, when these individuals and groups begin to plot and overthrow existing government, terrorize innocent civilians, and take up arms to overthrow the government, that is a totally different story. And second, we'd like to emphasize that the government is duty-bound to protect its people. It will do everything within its authority to ensure that the people are safe and protected, most especially from the enemies of the people, who are like wolves in sheep's clothing, taking advantage of the people's weaknesses and vulnerabilities so that they would unwittingly join their cause. Sometimes we wonder why these groups complain of red tagging when they themselves admit to being red, meaning communist. Their ideology is Marxist-Leninist Maoist, and their Bible is Season's Philippine Society and Revolution. Directs the waging of a revolution as a transition stage towards a communist state in the country. Third, the government, the DND, the ILG, along with PNP, NAP, and other agencies, are all for peace. And red tagging is not part of our agenda, nor is it our policy. Our distinguished senators, let me emphasize that we in the government are not the enemies here. We all know who the enemies are, and they are the communist terrorist groups under the CPP, NPA, NDF, and their allies who have been country's bane for the past 5 decades. Maraming pong salamat, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Secretary Jun Esperon, you have the floor.
The Senate President, Vicente Tito Soto, the Committee Chairman, Senator Panfilo Lacson, and honorable members of the Senate, thank you for issuing resolution number 559 that called for this hearing. And indeed, as you can see, we are in full force. We have come here to present the vision of the National Task Force to end the local communist armed conflict for peace and development, and later explain in more detail the duplicitous character of the CPP, NPA, NDF, which we collectively call the communist terrorist group. They have stunted the growth and modernization, not only of the countryside, but of the whole country. We may wonder why the NPA, with about 5,000 active fighters, have remained a threat. We know that the NPA is only the army. The CPP, the Communist Party of the Philippines, is the brain or the mastermind, more aptly called mastermind. And the National Democratic Front is the shield. Despite the successes of the security sector and of government in addressing the New People's Army, they continue to recruit new members. The problem really is they resort to radicalization and recruitment of the youth to replenish their rank in a cycle. Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I would like to propose that I be allowed to present a briefing to this body on the National Task Force purpose, vision, and organization, and how it is envisioned to remedy the malady that has plagued the country for the past 52 years. We certainly cannot allow this generation and the generations to come to continue to suffer from the atrocities and the anti-people activities of the CPP, NPA, and NDF. After my briefing, a very short briefing will be given by Secretary Ed Anyo of DILG, concentrating on the recruitment process. I further propose that a briefing be allowed for the Director General of NICA for his briefing on the true nature, the duplicitous character of the CPP and the NPA, NDF. And if Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, we are ready also to present former cadres. If you would call them to give their testimony, we are ready to present them. After our presentation, we hope to have done the trumpet call for unity across the land in one whole nation and one government approach to finally end the communist insurgency in this land. Thank you very much.
Before the briefing and presentation, Senator, the Vice Chair of the Committee on National Defense and Security would like to make an opening statement. Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa. Yes, Senator de la Rosa, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to all our resource speakers. Foremost, I would like to thank Senator Lacson for filing Senate Resolution number 559 and spearheading today's hearing to shed light on the issue of red tagging. This proceeding will pave a way both to the AFP and PNP on one hand and those allegedly red tagged on the other for an opportunity to clarify their respective assertions. Mr. Chair, to recall, the Senate Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, joined with this committee, held two public hearings on Senate Resolution number 38 last year. The committees heard the plight of parents who lost their children to people and organizations whose purpose, it seemed, was to drive families apart and creating rebels out of children. The Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs submitted its findings and recommendations through Committee Report number 10. It was signed by majority of the members of the concerned committees and is now pending in the Senate plenary for adoption. The said committee report carefully considers the statements of resource persons, especially the testimony on recruitment experiences of former rebels who have returned into the folds of the law. The committee reported out, among others, the issue of recruitment of minors as combatants by the communist terrorist groups is an age-old problem. There have been numerous reports in the past that claimed the CPP-NPA terrorists deliberately recruit teenagers as their manpower for armed struggle against the government. And there are allegations that some party list groups advocate communist ideologies. They espouse principles that give semblance to democratic values and doctrines, but with the real ultimate goal of overthrowing the government. Mr. Chair, some of the party list groups mentioned in Committee Report number 10 are also the same group which are allegedly being red tagged now. However, it was the group of parents invited during the Senate hearings who testified on the vicious cycle employed by the organizations in luring young students in joining underground activities as allegedly experienced by their children. Bagamat patuloy na kinakabit sa mga pangalan nila General Parlade, Yusek Badoy, DJ Monteagudo, and other military and police personnel ang salitang red tagging, I believe that one of their goals is to protect our countrymen from being recruited by the terrorist CPP, NPA, NDF. This communist terrorist group continues to spread terror even during the time of pandemic. As such, they aim to do their best to prevent any form of recruitment by communist terrorist group from occurring. As the saying goes, prevention is better than cure. Mr. Chairman, it is about time we call spade a spade. Tama na ang 50 taong panluluko at panlilinlang na ginagawa nitong teroristang grupong CPP, NPA, NDF sa ating mga kababayan. Sila ang hadlang sa pag-unlad ng ating bansa, lalong-lalo na sa kanayunan. This has to stop, Mr. Chairman. To the CPP, NPA, NDF legal fronts, I want to pose this question, which was already being asked by other people many times. What do you call an animal that quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, and swims like a duck? Is it a chicken? Hindi yan manok, Mr. Chairman, kundi it is a duck. Instead of complaining that the military and police are red tagging them, they should complain against Juma Sison because in the first place, it was Juma Sison who red tagged Bayan, KMU, KMP, Gabriela, Alliance of Concentrated Teachers, LFS, Cadena, and others as major component organizations of the NDF, one of the three inseparable organizations, the CPP, NPA, NDF, that aim at overthrowing the government through violent means. With the guidance of our distinguished chairman, I am certain that after today's hearing, the issues between the military and law enforcement agencies of the government and the left-leaning organizations will be resolved for the benefit of the Filipino people which we all vowed to serve. Maraming salamat. Magandang umaga muli sa ating lahat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator De La Rosa. Senator Rizontiveros would also like to make an opening statement, but before that, the chair acknowledges the presence of Senator Manny Pacquiao and Senator Kiko Pangilinan. Go ahead, Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Salamat po, Mr. Chair. Magandang umaga, Mr. Chair, fellow senators, resource persons. Death threat. I can't begin to imagine the anguish and emotional toll this must have taken on these women who have been directly hit by these accusations, as well as their families. I'm certain that it's also caused a chilling effect on citizens who only want to weigh in on issues of national importance and hold government to account for its failures to the people. Free speech is essential to democracy and nation building. It should not be suppressed, and least of all by red tagging. The second point, however, Mr. Chairman, is equally disturbing. The National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict has been allocated a proposed budget of 19 billion pesos for 2021, 16 billion of which has been earmarked for its barangay development program. This is a considerable amount of money. It's more than the proposed budget for the Department of Housing, Settlements and Urban Development, 632 million pesos, Office of the Ombudsman, 3.3 billion pesos, Department of Budget and Management, 1.9 billion pesos, and even the Department of Finance, 17.46 billion pesos. Moreover, our officials are spending an inordinate amount of time running after ordinary citizens using the communist bogeyman. In the meantime, a former AFP chief of staff has stated that China would seize the Philippines by force if a war were to break out between Beijing and Washington. Is this not a more imminent and more compelling threat, Mr. Chairman? Todo nakafocus sa CPP at sa NPA, the remnants of an insurgency facing imminent defeat in the battlefield. Pero walang angal na papapasukin sa ating bansa ang isang dayuhang bayan. Mr. Chair, I was a member of the GRP-NDFP's panel on the side of the government. The issues of the communist insurgency are not new to me. My party Akbayan historically has called for human rights accountability also of non-state actors at kasama dito ang NPA. I will not hesitate to speak against the violations of the NPA as I have done. But I will not sit idly by in the face of red tagging and scare tactics by uniformed agents of the state, especially when they are perpetrated against ordinary civilians, including women. And especially when there is a bigger enemy that is not being confronted. We are holding this hearing on the heels of the strongest typhoon in the world for 2020. Ito'y direktang tumama sa Bicol region na isa sa mga rehiyon na identified na may communist insurgency problem. Ngayon pa lang sasabihin ko na po, Mr. Chairman, yung 16 billion pesos na budget ng NTF-LCAC Barangay Development Program, I will call for a portion of it to be reallocated to typhoon rehabilitation. I've already called for 8 billion to be reallocated to health. Mag-reallocate din po tayo para sa kababayan nating mga nasa lanta. Salamat po, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rizonteveros. Before I recognize Secretary Esperon and Director General Nika, General Alex Monteagudo, to present before the committee, I would just like to ask this very important question, which is the meat of the hearing today. Kay Lieutenant General Parlade, have you in any way red-tagged Miss Liza Soberano, Angel Locsin, and Catriona Gray? Please answer. Just one question.
No, Your Honor, I did not.
Thank you. You may expound on that later, but in the meantime, we will now listen to the presentation of Secretary Esperon, if you're ready. June. After Secretary Esperon, did I hear you right na si Secretary Anyo will also make a presentation, and then Nika, Director General. Okay, in that order. Please proceed.
The President and members of the Senate, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant morning to all of you. It is with great pleasure to present the National Task Force to End the Local Communist Armed Conflict, NTF-LCAC, and the Framework of Good Governance. The scope of my presentation is as shown on the screen. I will start with the background, go to the strategic framework, the organization, and finally on the issue of red tagging. The communist terrorist threat for a long time has been a domestic challenge for the Philippines. In 2017, due to the CPP, NPA, NDF's attacks on persons who are not participants of the armed conflict, radicalization and recruitment to become child combatants, destruction of private and public properties, extortion against private entities, and other abuses, to include sexual opportunism, the President issued Proclamation 360, ending the peace negotiations with the communist rebels. Following this, the President signed Proclamation number 374 to formally declare the CPP-NPA as a terrorist organization in conjunction with the provisions of the Anti-Money Laundering Act. A year later, on December 4, 2018, the President signed the landmark Executive Order number 70, creating the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, NTF-LCAC, for a whole-of-nation approach in attaining inclusive and sustainable peace. The NTF-LCAC has the following mandates: formulate and implement a whole-of-nation approach, ensure interagency convergence in the implementation of the framework in conflicted areas and vulnerable areas, organize ad hoc interagency and multi-sectoral clusters and councils at all levels to fulfill its mandate. On April 15, 2019, the President approved the National Plan to End the Local Communist Armed Conflict and the implementing plans of the 12 clusters. The National Plan, LCAP, is in line with Ambition 2040 and the Philippine Development Plan, with its national vision of having a prosperous and predominantly middle-class society. The 12 clusters serve as the mechanism to highlight the convergence among the different government agencies and private sectors that will harmonize, synchronize, and integrate the implementation of the programs, activities, and projects of the communities. The National Task Force, LCAP, means serving the people through good governance, guided by transparency and accountability on the part of the government, participatory, so that it will ensure people's involvement in government decision-making process, and rule of law that bring about impartial justice system. This serves as guiding framework in the implementation of the 12 clusters, with primary consideration in the people's mobilization as part of the whole nation approach in addressing the communist terrorist group, or the CPP-NPA-NDF. The NTF-LCAP strategic framework is composed of two tracks. The first track is the political, economic, and socio-cultural track that will address the primary issues and root causes of insurgency and the development of strong institutions. The other track is the peace engagement, law enforcement, and military track that will entice the rebels to surrender, delegitimize the insurgents, and conduct sustained military operations. These two tracks shall be undertaken through the implementation of the 12 lines of efforts or clusters under the National Task Force. All these NTF clusters are mutually reinforcing through a whole-of-nation approach and good governance. As a result of these efforts, we expect an influx of surrenderers, dismantled CTG alliances, CTG support structures will cease to function, and leaders and cadres get isolated. As the terminal options, the government will offer a genuine political settlement and policing, which will lead to the defeat of the armed group, peace and security ensured, and development undertakings attained. Let me show again the 12 clusters or programs with the corresponding agencies that are involved. 12 clusters. Please take note that the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police and Security Sector are in only one of the 12 clusters. And the composition of the NTF Executive Committee, no less than the President is the chairman, and yours truly is the vice chairman. Shown is the organizational structure, involving 19 cabinet members, plus the Chief of Staff, Chief PNP, DG NICA, and NCIP, plus 2 from the private sector. We have successfully cascaded our mandate through the formation of regional, provincial, city, municipal, and even barangay task forces all over the country. Next slide, please. Next slide. We take note from this slide that the Regional Peace and Order Council and the Regional Development Council are part of the Regional Task Force, LCAP. Shown are 17 joint regional task forces nationwide, led by a cabinet officer for regional development and security. The CORDS spearheads the peace and development efforts to ensure that all programs, projects, and activities of the national government in the region are well implemented for the people through various mechanisms and strategies. Let me have a quick rundown of the accomplishments of the NTF-LCAP. The regional, provincial, and local level task forces are critical for LCAP to achieve its objectives. Shown are the updated tally of provinces, cities, and municipalities that established task forces as of September 2020. Undoubtedly, these task forces have been key to the program's many accomplishments. The Basic Services Cluster ensures the efficient delivery of housing, education, social protection, health, and basic utilities services to our people. Shown is the actual handover of 300 housing units to the indigenous peoples at the Manobo tribe based in Kapalong, Davao del Norte, as part of the effort to provide adequate housing facility to our indigenous peoples. LCAP has also strengthened DSW-led social programs such as the Pantawid Pamilyang Filipino Program or 4Ps, conditional cash transfers, senior citizens pension, and others. Likewise, the Last Mile School is a major program of DepEd intended to provide new classrooms for communities in conflict-affected and geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas. A total of 13,769 declarations of persona non grata all over the country were initiated by various local government units, indigenous peoples, and other sectors of our society. Sectoral unification, capacity building, and mobilization cluster plays an important role in nation building to include as well the dynamic implementation of people-centered, community-focused human rights programs and advocacies of the government, which will make the vulnerable sectors resilient against the communist terrorist operations and infiltration. Shown in this is the engagement of the NTF-LCAP in the NCIP, IPs, ICCT Regional Action Planning Workshop to unify the efforts of the various government agencies in support of our indigenous peoples. The Infrastructure and Resource Management Cluster aims to rationalize the utilization of natural resources. The National Greening Program being implemented nationwide is one of the NTF-LCAP's priority programs to provide livelihood to our people while promoting the preservation of our natural resources. LCAP programs conducted various livelihood trainings that have employed thousands of Filipinos were being undertaken by the Poverty Reduction and Livelihood Employment Cluster. Here are the highlights of the efforts of the member agencies of this cluster. Shown in the pictures are TESDA skills training graduates that are now manufacturing personal protective equipment that are being distributed to our frontliners in the fight against COVID-19. Former rebels are also benefiting from the skills training as part of the assistance being provided by the government under the Enhanced Comprehensive Local Integration Program or ECLIP, another cluster. For our international engagement cluster, we have engaged various organizations in the European Union in an effort to expose the fund generation scheme and terroristic activities of the CTG. As shown, the mission relayed valuable information such as the localized peace talks effort of our government, current programs on poverty alleviation, among others. The International Engagement Cluster also launched awareness campaigns through the Ambassadors of Truth, composed of indigenous peoples, who went around the United States and narrated their personal experiences on the atrocities and human rights abuses committed by the CTG against their tribes. The Legal Cooperation Cluster of the NTF-LCAP provides legal assistance to the victims of CTG atrocities and recruitment of minors in armed conflict. Among the cases currently handled by the Legal Cooperation Cluster is the case of Alexandra Pacalda for violation of RA 9156 for illegal possession of firearms and explosives. The case is pending in Quezon. Likewise, legal cases were filed against leaders of the CPP, NPA, and DF for their crimes committed when they killed their own comrades during the series of communist purgings nationwide, one of which is the Inopacan massacre, which is an ongoing case. Inopacan Leyte. The Stratcom cluster of the NTF LCAP promotes the efforts of the government to win the peace. Public information campaign is being undertaken using various media platforms for dissemination. Shown are some of the products of the information operations campaign in social media. Through the Stratcom, the NTF spokespersons were designated, and we cover blue letter days and advocacy and capacity building efforts were sustained. The Situational Awareness and Knowledge Management Cluster, or Intelligence, develops and implements a comprehensive national education awareness campaign, purposely for deeper understanding of the threat situation, including the different aspects of the programs, strategies and tactics of the communist terrorists. They have conducted orientation for government executives and the various government agencies nationwide, as shown. They are also on call by private institutions to lecture on the nature of the enemy. There have been a lot of engagements. The Peace, Law and Order and Development Support Cluster, which are composed of the AFP and the PNP and the Coast Guard primarily, and the security sector, is guided with the strict adherence to respect to human rights, international humanitarian law, and rule of law. To address the CPP-NPA recruitment of child combatants, Provincial Task Force LCAP of Davao Region, in partnership with DepEd, launched its Bayanihan sa School program and established 5 school buildings that will accommodate former students of Salugpungan schools. Salugpungan School is a CTG-affiliated school that is known to have recruited and trained students to become child combatants. The CPP-NPA-NDF is a highly organized outfit that has no boundaries in terms of their deviousness. In previous occasions, I have spoken before you about how they have set up alternative learning centers, more known as Salugpungan schools, in attempt to radicalize children, orient them to communism, expose them to anti-government activities, and train them to be child combatants. These are clear violations of international norms and laws, particularly the UN conventions on the rights of children. As of June 2020, we were able to close down 75 of the identified 97 communist breeding institutions. Through intercluster operations, schools which serve as recruitment hubs were shut down. The schools involved are the Alternative Learning Center for Agricultural and Livelihood Development, the Tribal Filipino Program of Surigao del Sur, TRIPS, Community Technical College, Southeastern Mindanao, and the Salugpungan Tatano in Canugon Community Learning Centers. May I also say that the Armed Forces and the PNP have dismantled 24 out of the existing identified guerrilla fronts, and another 24 guerrilla fronts were weakened. This actually represents the major accomplishment of the AFP, PNP, and the security sector. So far, the outcomes of our LCAP initiatives have been encouraging. A reduction in the CPP-NPA's strength and collapse of guerrilla fronts were noted, as indicated earlier. 13,460 former rebels and militia Nambayan members have surrendered and were successfully reintegrated to society under the Balik Loob program. Moreover, of the Department of Defense. Moreover, they received housing, education, and livelihood benefits through our enhanced comprehensive local integration program. Meanwhile, through various campaigns, we were able to disrupt extortion activities of the CPP, NPA, and NDF against local businesses, various industries, and private citizens. As of June 12, 2020, the ILG provided financial assistance to 4,325 former rebels worth 314 million. This includes immediate assistance, livelihood assistance, reintegration assistance, and firearms remuneration. The ECLIP provides the former rebels with financial and livelihood assistance to help them in their re-immersion to the mainstream of our society. In a show of importance to their allegiance to our government, no less than the President himself led the distribution of ECLIP benefits to 262 former rebels in San Isidro Leyte last January. Since the LCAP program was implemented, we have devised various initiatives, including the Barangay Development Program. The Barangay Development Program as the flagship program to dislodge the CPP-NPA from their guerrilla bases through development efforts. The Barangay Development Program aims to provide peace building and development interventions in conflict-assisted barangays that have already been cleared of the CPP-NPA presence. For the period 2016 to 2019, 822 barangays have been cleared and are now primed and ready for development. To fast-track the process, we have proposed to Congress the inclusion in the fiscal year 2021 budget that said barangays will receive the much-needed funds of 20 million each. The intent is to provide basic services to transform and free these barangays from NPA manipulation through the provision of a farm-to-market road, 1 kilometer, concrete, and local road projects, school building, water sanitation, health facilities, greening programs, livelihood opportunities, technical and vocational training, and social protection programs and community electrification. For 2020, and this is, by the way, supported by the League of Provinces of the Philippines. For 2020, we have cleared 502 barangays and are intent to clear other vulnerable and affected barangays and apply the Barangay Development Program. The bottom line is the LCAP program has become an important facet of the government's peace and development agenda. And as we speak, it continues to do wonders for our Filipino communities. We are aware of calls to defund the LCAP and discredit its programs. That is why I welcome this platform to straighten out some of the misinformation lodged against it. On the issue of red tagging. Red tagging or red baiting, regardless of the definitions created and adopted by the front organizations, is unequivocally not a matter of policy within the LCAP program. As a construct of these organizations, red tagging has no factual basis and cannot be attributed to any past or current government policy, program, or activity. Given the history of these organizations, one may regard such as part of their many ruses to deflect and distance themselves from the truth. Red tagging is wholly inconsistent with what LCAP is all about. In my mind, Your Honor, in my humble mind, no benefit can be derived from it. That is why it is inconceivable to even consider engaging in such activity. LCAP is a development-centered undertaking. If anything, we have always supported the dissemination of truth. We have information campaigns to provide clarity to address circulating misinformation or for purposes of discouraging our youth from falling prey to the enchantment of cost-oriented groups that actually funnel recruits to the CPP-NPA. If necessary, we exercise the state's moral duty of parens patriae by warning or reminding our citizens, especially the youth, to be careful in dealing with these front organizations. To be abundantly clear, today's message is not about explaining or justifying the government's position on the Makabayan Bloc, the various groups under its umbrella and other coalition affiliates. The link to CPP-NPA are real and not imagined. The basis of this actual role in communist terrorism are solid and well documented, and their affiliations and links are in fact intimate and mutually supportive. Testimonies of former rebels and disenchanted front organizations, along with decades of observed patterns of cooperation between the CPP-NPA and front organizations, confirm their connection with each other. From my perspective, there is no need to justify our position that the Makabayan Bloc, the various groups under its umbrella, and other coalition affiliates are linked to the CPP-NPA. The briefing of the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency after SILG's briefing will further elaborate and cement the role of the Makabayan Bloc in the communist movement and will prove that it has historical basis and well documented. If you were able, many of us who were able to live through the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, it is likely that you will share the same belief that these organizations and the CPP-NPA are probably cut from the same cloth. Before I end, I must reiterate that the CPP-NPA NDF is designated as or listed as a terrorist organization by the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. That ends my briefing, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Esperon. Before I recognize Secretary Anyo, the chair would just like to state that Attorney Sarsa, who is representing the Makabayan Bloc party lists, has requested to make a manifestation after all the presentations, and then afterwards she is requesting to leave. So yes, Secretary Anyo, you are recognized.
Again, Senate President Vicente Soto III, Senator Pampilo Lacson, our Chairperson and Committee on National Defense and Security, Peace, Unification, Reconciliation, Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa, Senator Risa Antiveros, Senator Emmanuel Manny Pacquiao, fellow public servants. Magandang umaga po. Ito po ay very brief presentation, 3 minutes presentation and 2 minutes video clip. This is also for the parents, for the youth and students, and young rebels inside who have been sweet-talked by the CPP, NPA, and DF recruiters. How are CPP front organizations recruiting idealistic Filipinos to join the revolution? Distinguished members of this chamber, allow me to give an overview on the CPP, NPA, and DF recruitment process. First, they prey on the innocence or even ignorance of Filipinos, especially the youth students, by bringing up legitimate and cause-driven advocates or advocacies for the welfare of our countrymen through regular discussion groups. They convince recruits to join legal leftist organizations, to include party list groups, to have an avenue to advance their personal advocacy but hide the real agenda of boosting party list membership. Capitalizing on the recruits' idealism, orientations, and discussions on societal issues are then conducted to gain their sympathy and support. This stage likewise convinces them to air their grievances and take their actions and voices to the streets by participating in public mobilizations and rallies. Once they stir this empathy, the left now starts agitation and radicalization, selects progressive potential recruits, those with advanced thinking, and urges these individuals to attend special lectures and undergo courses under the Pambansang Demokratikong Paaralan or PADEPA, run by the CPP. and make them embrace communist ideology and eventually overthrow the government. In here, they begin to discuss national issues not related to their respective advocacies and tie these concerns up to point out that these are faults of the government. Then they will take the ESCOM or the Special na Kursong Masa, which is a sectoral orientation focusing on peasants, youth, women, workers, and indigenous people. This will then be followed by another course, the MKLRP, or the Maikling Kurso sa Lipunan at Rebolusyong Pilipino, which tackles agitation and introduction to revolution. Finally, they will be subject to take the ARAC, or the Araling Aktivista, which develops commitment to the party and leadership. From the theoretical level of indoctrination, further radicalization now comes in the process of basic mass immersion. This is categorized into exposure, which takes 3 to 5 days, immersion, which lasts for a month, and the tour of duty, which lasts 3 to 6 months. Recruits are brought to the guerrilla zones to show them the real situation and concretize what have been instilled in them during the PADEPA. The ultimate goal of which is to strengthen the resolve and embrace the communist primary form of struggle, which is the armed revolution. They are also required to take party courses to become a Communist Party member. It starts with a basic party course and lecture on CPP Constitution, which are prerequisites for the first oath as candidate party member. This will then be followed by intermediate party course and a appraiser on the CPP Constitution as a requirement for their second oath as full-time party member. Eventually, those who are programmed to higher positions are required to undergo advanced party course to heighten their knowledge about the party. Upon completion of the above aforementioned stages, new party members may opt to stay in the NPA unit where they were immersed and serve as political guide and eventually become a cadre, or choose to go back to the white areas as recruiter, organizer, and member of the party branch that constitutes the core of the CPP front organization. Indeed, the CPP-NP and the system is intricate, so we must dig deeper into the process. Kailangan mabatid ng lahat kung paano pinagsasamantalahan ang ideolohismo ng mga Pilipino habang hindi nila nalalaman na unti-unti na pala silang nalulubog sa kumunoy ng paglilindang ng mga komunista. So as more and more individuals and groups are coming forward to denounce and unveil the identity of the CPP-NP and their front organizations, and as hearings like this expose the truth behind the CNN recruitment and endless propaganda, we hope that we will be in a better position against this predicament. And so I sincerely thank Senator Pampilo Lacson for taking the initiative. And I also thank everyone who heed the call of the good senator to substantiate our position on the brainwashing strategies of the CPP, NP, and DF. Ladies and gentlemen, with your indulgence, allow me to show this audio-visual presentation, a 2-minute video presentation that will hopefully shed brighter light on the communist scheme, which starts from CPP front organization recruitment to their journey as full-time NPAs until their death. Please show the video.
Kasama sa 14 na napatay na umano'y mga rebelde ay isang estudyante, si Josephine Ann Lapira, 22 anyos at estudyante ng UP Manila at opisyal umano ng Grupong Gabriela. Nagpaalam umano ito sa kanila na sasailalim sa isang immersion.
Ito ang larawan ng 3 NPA na napatay sa engkwentro. 5 ang nasawi sa hanay ng NPA. Kabilang na dyan ang alias RJ at Raid Manalo alias Kapandan.
Ako'y matalinong bata at karal po dyan sa UP ay na-recruit po ng mga naging aktivista. Una nakita namin sa TV yung mga rally-rally. Balidado po namin na ganyan. Hindi naman po nagkulang ng pagpapaalala. Parang hindi na po kayang baliin yung kanyang paniniwala.
Maraming pong salamat, Mr. Chairman. Yun lang po.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Ed Anyo. Yes, Senator Risa Ontiveros, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a very brief comment. Speaking as a mother, and speaking as a long-time peace advocate as well since the past 3 decades, but mostly speaking as a mother, tama po ba talaga, Mr. Chairman, na magpakita tayo ng ganyang mga video tungkol sa mga bata, mga anak ng mga kapwa magulang natin who are now dead and cannot speak for themselves? May I just make that of record, Mr. Chairman, at salamat po.
Yes, Senator Ontiveros, thank you. This part of the discussion, this part of the red tagging issue raised against the armed forces of the Philippines, and they're here to present their side of the issue. So with that, Director General Monteagudo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Senate President, Senator Vicente Soto III, the Chairman, Senator Panfilo Lacson, sir, the members of the Senate Committee on National Defense, Peace, Unification, Reconciliation. Good morning. Mr. Chairman, would I be allowed to remove for the presentation?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. In the book of John, chapter 8, verse 32, the Lord Jesus said, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Slides, please. As the Director General of the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency and the head of the Situational Awareness and Knowledge Management cluster of the National Task Force to End the Local Communist Armed Conflict, I am here, Mr. Chairman, to present the truth and nothing but the validated truth about the 52-year plague
that is the CPP, NPA, NDF. How it has infiltrated the bureaucracy and the society, and how it threatens the hope and future of our country while recruiting, radicalizing, and exploiting the children and the youth. We thank the chairman for calling for this public hearing and for inviting us so that we can finally reveal the truth to the people. For several months now, an NPF LCAC has been accused of red tagging by no less than party list representatives of Bayan Luna, Congressman Carlos Isagani Zarate, ACT Teachers Party List Congresswoman Franz Castro, Gabriela Party List Congresswoman Arlene Rosas, and Kabataan Party List Congresswoman Sarah Jane Ilago. They claim that the NPF LCAC, chaired by no less than the President of the Republic, has been fomenting lies and accusing the NPF of red tagging and purveyor of false information. They accuse the task force that all the information revealing their connection to the CPP, NDF, NPA, or the communist terrorist group is just a figment of our imagination. They even tried to silence us by bullying us, threatening us with cases, and even to the extent of blocking our budget. Mr. Chairman, the issue is red tagging. But what is red tagging? In his dissenting opinion in one case, Supreme Court Associate Justice Marvick Leonen cited a 2011 journal article that defined red tagging or red baiting as the act of labeling, branding, naming, and accusing individuals and or organizations of being left-leaning, subversives, communists, or terrorists, used as a strategy by state agents, particularly law enforcement agencies and the military, against those perceived to be threats or enemies of the state. Note, however, that this is not a legal and binding definition, nor is it considered a crime. We are aware that the CTG proxies want to make this act as a crime so that they can continue to repress any dissent or opposition to their plot of overthrowing our government through violent means and establishing a godless communist system. At the outset, therefore, we at the NPF LCAC admit that we are exposing individuals and organizations which we have validated as CPP, NDF, NPA members and front organizations. We therefore plead guilty, not to red tagging, but to truth tagging. We have to tell the people who the CPP, NDF, NPA members or front organizations really are, not because we want to curtail their rights, but more importantly, to protect the rights of the general public, the Filipino children and their families, the indigenous people and their communities from the veiled lies, deception, and exploitation by the CTGs. All the information we have revealed about the CPP, NDF, NPA, and their connection with the groups such as the Makabayan Bloc are standing on solid ground. They underwent a rigorous process of evaluation and have been vetted through the revelation of surrendered, arrested, and captured communist terrorist group personalities, as well as documents and videos. Also used as references are published books by former members of the CPP, NPA, NDF, such as the book Debunked, written by Rigoberto Tiglao, and The Wars Within, based on the life of alias Eric Almendras. At the outset, it is imperative that we all understand that the communist terrorist organization in the Philippines is a single entity, which over the years has successfully convinced everyone that it is three distinct organizations, the CPP, NPA, and the NDF. The truth is, as far as their own organizational structure will show, it is just one single organization. The CPP with two main branches, its army, which is the NPA, and its united front, the NDF. In the interest of trying to forge peace with the CPP, even the Philippine government has accepted the CPP scheme that the NDF is separate and distinct from the CPP. My presentation and the presentation of the other resource persons of the NTF will show, however, that the NDF is an integral part of the CPP, and top NDF members are CPP members. In this connection, please allow us to show a video of CPP Chairman Jose Maria Sison himself, taken in 1987, or 30 years ago, when he boastfully identified the front organizations like Bagong Alyansang Makabayan or Bayan, na Kilusang Magbubukid ng Pilipinas or KMP, the General Assembly of Binding Women for Reform, Integrity, Equality, Leadership, and Action, Gabriela, the League of Filipino Students, and Alliance of Concerned Teachers, and several others as integral part of their network in advancing the interests of the Communist Party of the Philippines. Please watch this video. Sound, please. Sound, map.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Senate President.
may we have this restarted because we're missing a few minutes already of the presentation.
There's something wrong with your video file. Yeah, sige. If you have another source.
This is actually very important video, Mr. Chairman. I would like to really show this. This is the premise of our...
Yeah, while waiting for the video, no. Gusto ko lang ipagbigay alam kay Senator Santiveros na naintindihan ng chair yung pinaghuhugutan niya kanina, yung kanyang pag-alala bilang isang ina. Pero sa kabilang dako, mainam na rin napapaalalahanan yung mga magulang, lalo na mga ina, na tingnan nilang ang kapakanan ng kanilang mga anak, na wag nilang pabayaan na ma-expose sa kung totoo man yung mga video na pinakita, no, ng defense sector. It's just unfortunate and it's sad that the militant groups are not present here this morning, so they can easily or rebut immediately what is being presented by the security sector. Yun lang yung nakakalungkot dito kasi wala sila rito, except of course the one representing them, Attorney Sarsa, no, na nagre-represent sa Makabayan Dock. So ready na ba yung video niya?
Yes, sir. I will play the sound here, sir. Yeah, my microphone. Okay. Simultaneously with the video, sir. Please play the video. Please play the video. Ako nang bahala sa sound. Start. Umpisa. Please.
Three processes by which the Philippine Revolution is to be advanced. These include the building of the Communist Party of the Philippines, the building of the new People's Army, and the building of the National Democratic Front. The Communist Party of the Philippines was established on December 6, 1968 as the Marxist-Leninist vanguard party of the working class. This party is supposed to be the standard bearer of the working class, which is that class that is the most progressive, productive, and political force in the Philippines. It is true that a minority class, especially only the party which represents it, cannot win the Philippine Revolution all by itself. At any rate, even while there are the forces of armed revolution, there are the legal democratic forces in the Philippines. The biggest of these is Bagong Alyansang Makabayan, or Bayan in short. It has a membership of more than 2 million members in more than 1,000 member organizations. Its biggest component organizations are Kilusang Mayo Uno, which is the labor center, the Pambansang Kilusang Magbubukid, which is the Kilusang Magbubukid ng Pilipinas, or KMP, Gabriela, the Women's Alliance, League of Filipino Students, Alliance of Concerned Teachers, Cadena, and so on. As I have earlier pointed out, Partido ng Bayan, founded last August 30 and 31.
May I continue, Mr. Chairman?
Please continue.
You would also like to submit documents that show that the European Union, the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada all declared the CPP-NPA and CSN as terrorists. A regional trial court has also issued a warrant of arrest for CSN for his involvement in the Inupacan Leyte massacre, where hundreds of the CTG members were murdered to purge their ranks of suspected informers. Since 1987, the Philippine government has been engaged in several peace talks with the CTG, hoping that this will be the shortcut to bringing peace to our land. But while the Philippine government was hoping to reach a final agreement, the CPP saw this as an opportunity to undermine the government. They made demands that were short of the Philippine government surrendering to the CPP. All the while, the military, police, and security sector's hands were tied behind their backs lest they be accused as spoilers of peace. The CPP, NDF, NPA even have its established peace talks advocates, religious groups, academe, and politicians from the legislative branch to pressure the government to engage in peace talks. Despite the absence of any progress, the different administrations engage in peace talks in the hope that this will be the solution to the decades-long problem of communist insurgency. But as it has always turned out, the CPP-NPA does not want peace. It wants to seize power. Mr. Chairman, allow us to prove this through the statement of Luis Halandoni, a disillusioned former Catholic priest turned atheist, who was the chairman of the NDF negotiating panel and a CPP Central Committee member based in Europe. In this video, Halandoni explicitly stated that their real intention to the peace talks is to support their so-called revolutionary struggle, a euphemism for violently overthrowing the government. To them, peace talks is just one of the means to an end. Please watch this video.
legal struggle.
Excuse me, sir. Pakiulit. Isasabay ko lang dito. Wala uling sound.
Another form of legal struggle, which is possible to be used by the revolutionary forces in order to advance the revolutionary armed struggle and the revolutionary mass movement. This other form of legal struggle, the peace negotiations, does not replace the revolutionary armed struggle nor the revolutionary mass movement. In fact, it should advance, it should support this revolutionary armed struggle as the main form of struggle, and the revolutionary mass movement, which is a more important struggle than the peace negotiations.
But what has this got to do with the issue on red tagging? We showed the video because this strategy clearly demonstrates the duplicitous nature of the CTG, employing what they call as dual tactics. They engage in peace talks so that they will earn the support of civil society personalities and organizations who are peace advocates. They use rogue priests to represent the CPP-NPA in the NDF so that they will appear righteous, maybe even holy, which works for the Filipino public who are generally religious. Ito po ang tunay na anyo ng CPP, NPA, NDF. Sa madaling salita, sila ay doble cara, a two-faced monster. One face looks like an angel, righteous and morally upright, while the other face is a deceiver. His dream is to have a permanent and lasting peace in our land. But typical of the CPP, NDF, NPA dual tactics, they demanded power sharing from the president, who said that this is not for him to give. They then launched simultaneous attacks all over the country while the government security forces were on stand down. The CTG attacks forced the president to terminate the talks, and in December 2017, declared them as terrorists. Meantime, in order to attain an inclusive and sustainable peace and adopt a national peace framework, the president in 2018 signed Executive Order 70, creating the National Task Force to End the Local Communist Armed Conflict, or NTF-ELCA, with himself at the helm. The NTF-ELCA is guided by the principle of good governance that adopts a whole of government and a whole of nation approach. As such, the Situational Awareness and Knowledge Management Cluster, headed by the NICA, not only provides information to the NTF leadership and regular members, but also to the different agencies of government and various sectors of our society, so that they will be made aware and enlist their support to end the communist terrorist scourge. Dumating na ang oras upang wakasan ang pandolokon at karahasan ng CPP, NDF, NPA. Lahat po tayo mga Pilipino ay kasali sa adhikaing ito. It is for this reason that the NTF needs to inform our people, everyone, and educate them about this 52-year-old problem. Because the only way we can resolve the CTG problem is to harness the support of the people. It may sound cliche, but in our fight against the CTG, the battle is not anywhere else but in the hearts and minds of our people. Whoever wins the people wins the war. That is the only way we can end the local communist armed conflict. But how can we win the minds of our people if we do not inform them of the truth? If we do not speak out, who will deliver the message of truth? During the State of the Nation address in 2018, the president, in exasperation, said, "I have met the enemy face to face, and sadly, the enemy is us. We are our worst enemy. Oftentimes, our apathy and indifference prevents us from solving our problems. But many of our people are apathetic to the CTG problem because they are unaware of what the problem is and who the enemies are. Indeed, how can parents protect their children from CTG recruitment if they do not know that an ACT member is teaching and radicalizing their children inside their classrooms? If they do not know that the books being used in schools have portions that teach their children to hate everything about their government, how can our innocent children and the youth discern what CPP front organizations they need to stay away from if we do not warn them and identify the CPP, NDF, NPA front organizations? Who will protect our children? Honorable members of this committee, we wish to inform you that based on the 5-year program of the CPP, a copy of which we are submitting, the Central Committee has directed the lower organs to recruit children less than 15 years old. So now we have seen an increased number of child combatants from the NPA, whom the NPA started to train as early as 8 and 10 years old. Former indigenous people's child warrior Dato Awing and by Magdalena, both from Mindanao, can attest to this child warrior program of the NPA. A comics about their story, printed with the help of NGOs, is also submitted to this committee. To note, the CTG brought indigenous people, or so-called lumats, housed at the UCCP Haran Center in Davao City to Metro Manila through a lakbayan to participate in CTG-led anti-ASEAN protests in 2017. Since some of them were minors, they were housed at UP Diliman in Quezon City, where they stayed for several months, even after the culmination of the ASEAN Summit and related summits in November of that year. How can we then empower our people if they do not know the truth? Thus, the need to inform them the truth about the extent of the problem. Because uninformed people is an empowered people. The great general and strategist Sun Tzu said, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. Allow us, therefore, Mr. Chairman, to explain how extensive our problem in the CTG is, who this enemy really is, and how they have mastered the art of deception for 52 years. The 3 powerful arms of the revolution. The CTG adopts the so-called 3 powerful arms of the communist terrorist revolution in this framework. The CTG uses 3 weapons. The party, personified by the CPP, provides the direction and political leadership, and that remains the general line and direction of the group. The army, represented by the NPA, serves as the military arm of the communist movement.